Hello, my name is Michael Reas. Welcome to the first day of Projects and Platforms, Exploring the Culture of NFTs. Today, we'll be discussing artist projects and how they use NFTs as a medium. Tomorrow, Michelle Thurs and guests will discuss platforms and their role in forming a culture. This project is created at the Center for New Art at William Paterson University and supported by the Office of Academic Affairs. It is also supported by Cadena, a blockchain company, and also with partners from Battery Journal, Gardenship Studios, and Sculpture Magazine. We are consulted by the chairs of the art department and the communications department, Daryl Moore and the artist Keith Obadike, respectively. At this conference, we strive to promote gender equality. We are inclusive and open to all participants, regardless of socioeconomic position, gender, sexual orientation, race, or creed. We seek to support mental health and transcend borders and political positions. The impetus to explore NFTs came from interviews. I invited artists using AR to add a layer to my installation Synthetic Cells, Site, and Parasite. Afterwards, I interviewed each artist as part of a series called Ad Hoc on YouTube, hosted by the International Sculpture Center. In Projects and Platforms, I invited artists using NFT and generative software as a medium, independent of my practice, but not independent of my interest. I'm keen to explore computer culture and its interrelation to the culture at large, sometimes dominating it, sometimes diminished by it. Over the last 6 months, Michelle Thurs and I have developed this conversation amid the NFT storm. With the fall of the market and the ongoing extension of the NFT landscape, we asked each other and our panelists, could NFTs be used as a medium, perhaps in ways that the metastructure couldn't anticipate? Could they exist in markets that represent the possibility of a new culture? I'm grateful to everyone who will contribute to this conference. Today, we'll hear from David Henry Brown Jr., Michael Jew, and Casey Reas, all discussing projects they've realized using NFTs. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we'll hear from Sophia Garcia of Art Xcode, Jennifer and Kevin McCoy, artists and founders of Monograph, and Nadia Taja from Snark Art. By way of introduction, I'm a sculptor working in the extended field with 3D design and automatic manufacture, as well as augmented reality, animation, and installation. Synthetic Cells, Site and Parasite, and Pneumatopia are recent shows. I'm also a professor of sculpture and digital media at William Paterson University and the director of the Center for New Art there. The center works with students, faculty, guest artists, and designers. We seek to explore the potential for creativity and experimental media using programs and residencies. We host 10 artists a year speaking about their artist practice, as well as helping artists to realize projects. We also promote conversations to explore complex issues for artists in the age of digital representation. To introduce the panelists, all three are noted and accomplished. All have resumes packed with projects, accolades, and achievements. Michelle and I sought to bring together people who've used NFTs for another purpose, not only as a tool or trend. Here you may find approaches that extend contemporary art practice into an abstract and disembodied media. David Henry Brown Jr. is notable for his work on Instagram and OpenSea as his character, David Henry Nobody Jr. His antic representations, often tight clips of action, seem to be more performance than image, and carry with them a history of both theater and performance. The sense of the abject, the body, and the grotesque are ever present, but abstractly so. He will open a show, Upside Down World, an immersive installation with NFTs on June 10th, 2022, at 11 Newell Gallery in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. Michael Jew of Organic Crystal Reef Growth joins us from South Korea, where he's been working on a project extending that work into new and notable places. Major exhibition of Jew's work include Perspectives, Michael Jew, at the Smithsonian Freer Sackler Museum in Washington, D.C., the 49th Venice Biennale in the Korean Pavilion, Century Meridian at the Kavagupti Gallery in Chicago, Illinois, and many others. In his works, Ju takes a nonlinear, almost cyclical approach to his practice. Together with his combination of scientific language and research, his pieces often result in work that is a documentation of the process. Ju is represented by Kavi Gupta Gallery in Chicago. Casey Reas, active since the year 2000, has exhibited worldwide in contemporary art museums, galleries, festivals, and other venues. He is the co-creator with Ben Fry of the programming language Processing, 2001, and has authored many books, articles, and catalogs on creative coding. His work ranges from small works on paper to urban scale installations, and he balances solo work in the studio with collaborations with architects and musicians. Reas is also a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, and he is the founder of Feralfile. He is represented by Bitforms Gallery in New York and DAM Projects in Berlin. We will begin with a short presentation from David Henry Brown, followed by Michael Ju, and then Casey Reas. After that, there will be a moderated discussion. Towards the end, there will be an opportunity for people to comment and question via the YouTube live comments. The chat is monitored, so you can ask a question at any time. Please welcome David Henry Brown, Jr., and thank you for coming.
Hello, everybody. Am I on? Hello, and welcome, and Michael and everybody, thank you so much for having me. Perhaps I have the most chaotic looking background of everybody here. And that is indeed because I am opening a solo show that's highly ambitiously experimental in 2 days. So it does look like a bomb went off in here, which was representative of the creative process that just happened. As Michael so eloquently and kindly introduced my work, I'm an immersionist performance artist and sculptor. I kind of come not from academia, but rather from my own homemade recipe for how to make art based on my life. And I, although I did show in the art world when I could in my 20s, when I was younger in the 90s, I was also like very involved in these immersionist performance art underground art clubs, and it was very influential in that there wasn't a lot of commercial pressure for me to succeed, so that I was able to try all kinds of wild things and kind of frankly fall flat on my face, and everybody was really supportive. So my work is probably a pretty independent voice and independent vision on what I think art is for me. And there is no doubt from the beginning I've been out to change what art can be from the very beginning, and I'm still very adamant about that. I guess fast forwarding to issues more relevant rather than going through everything I've done in the past, you could probably queue up the link I gave you to my website if you want. So I think one of the first things I want to talk about is a more recent body of work that was really an interaction with and a reflection of social media and more Web 2. And now that this body of work is transitioning into Web 3 and NFTs. So this, I created a character that lives on Instagram in my performances. It's also a gray area between me and my life. I am into radical mixes of art and life. Most of my work before this has jumped well off the canvas into reality, getting into almost stuff like Andy Kaufman, if not even more extreme, basically. So with this body of work, I sort of evolved online this character on my Instagram, David Nobody. which, as Michael alluded to, I think when we were online, we're sort of disembodied digital ghosts. It sort of welcomed an opportunity to become this sort of shape-shifting character, which I am anyway. So I started more and more experimenting with putting all kinds of different things all over myself in character as David Nobody, and documenting the transformations. By 2016, Vice discovered me, and I was profiled on high fructose. I got a suggested user award from Instagram and gained 30,000 followers in 10 days flat. It was a huge rise up, and it was a very amazing period. The first piece you're seeing is Schizo Salad Man from 2017, which is actually now a one-of-one NFT in one of my OpenSea collections. It's available actually. So yeah, I kept evolving the character, and basically I had some very cool exhibitions and things like that happened, but also my work was quite challenging, and I wasn't always offered art world exhibitions. So again, coming from these undergrounds and also having a foot in the gallery system too, like I have always continued to stay extremely creative, and I keep evolving my work no matter what the circumstances is. Basically, I won't wait for a big museum to give me a show to be creative. I mean, I would love that. I'm totally down. But like the David Nobody body of work, as I kept like evolving these characters and posting them, it sort of blew up bigger and bigger. And I sort of was able on Web2 to crash the gates of the gatekeepers, whoever they are. But I was basically able, my work was like so weird, nobody would show it, but then all of a sudden on Instagram, I was able to have like, be exposed to like 10,000 followers, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 60,000. My views, the images and views became viral. Some of the videos had millions of views on them in 2017, 18. So suddenly like my language was exposed to the public, and it just exploded from there, basically. But it's also quite wild too, because I'm taking like pretty out there avant-garde ideas of the self and the body and disembodiment. And also I think about it, kind of rambling here, in terms of like sort of wearing consumerist dilemmas on myself in various cases. I like to wear my problems or become the illusions of society, and live them out. So I think that's sort of my art practice in general. You can keep scrolling if you like down into this section. Yeah, if you keep scrolling, there's a lot more of these pieces up. And again, a lot of these are now one of ones. You can keep rolling through. That's painted into a corner that's early 2015. This is Hamburger Helper, which is based on the Hamburger Helper, the stuff with the MSG in it, right? You put in burgers. It's like middle America. So I could say it was quite unsettling to wear that much raw beef. Like I had nightmares in the middle of the night from it. It's weird because like I eat meat, but I guess you don't think about it, right? But anyway, I like to wear these things. This piece was pretty shocking at the time to post on social media, and especially early on before they really separated the algorithms so much. Like I like a lot of Trump people and evangelical Christians would see my work. And the trolling was just crazy. I've probably blocked thousands and thousands of really psychotic, like QAnon people. And you could obviously see that an image like this will drive them out of their minds. It's so irrational. But it comes from Hamburger Helper, which is the logo with the hand. And I mean, not to be crass and profane, but it always kind of reminded me of like sort of a subliminal like masturbation image, basically like the hand and the meat, and it helps your meat. So there's a lot of humor and a lot of slapstick in my work, but the intention is pretty serious. You can keep scrolling if you don't mind. This is the reptilian mind, is also a bit older too. Now these resemblage pieces, as I call them, which is a word I coined to describe what I do. It's the combinations of the word resemble and collage. And it basically means physically collaging on yourself so that you look like CGI. And the reason, and that was definitely a response to Instagram and social media, that I noticed that, and for others too, like I kind of liken it to like when you go to a movie and like you see these images, you're bombarded by imagery and you're immersed in it. And then when you leave, like you kind of take that construct and you project it into your life for a little while. But you have to understand that on the internet is even more immersive and deeper inside your nervous system. So you're actually, everything that you're picking up on this every day, you're taking it and you're projecting it into your life like way, 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 way more than you think, way more. So the resemblage body of work is an interaction with the psychological effects of the technology as I see it, and a sort of, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a Marxist deconstruction, isn't it? So I like, anyway, I kind of react to it and I wear it. I think the other thing about David Nobody too is that the character is a kind of a cliche. I mean, it's supposed to be an enfant terrible, a performance artist de Instagram. So I get to be existing within the sort of internet trope of this character. There's been tremendous amount of creative freedoms in it, where I could kind of do and try all these kinds of things that to some extent they are clickbait on a certain level. But there's an enormous challenging creativity available in it. You can keep scrolling if you don't mind. This is also a little bit older. Can you scroll up a little bit more so I can see the title? Just a little bit. Oh yes, Displaced Figure with Jettisoned Eye. That's also older, from 2015. And I think that these pieces where I wore collage, I think that's specifically where resemblage came from. I mean, many people have used collage, but I think like wearing the collage was much more interesting. I'm very interested in these works in like kind of playing to the camera and becoming at one with the camera. I mean, I think it's quite obvious that we're becoming cybernetic, you know, in a way. And this is literally like wearing oppressive advertising that creates unrealistic standards of self-worth for people. So I like to sort of, in a data sense, I interfere and intervene and disrupt. Mike Kelly said art is about fucking shit up. I kind of agree, basically, on a certain level. So anyway, here I am wearing it. But it's more than that. I mean, it's also like inclusive and fun, and it's supposed to make you laugh and think.
David, you've got 2 minutes.
Okay. Maybe I didn't realize I was losing time so quick. Do you want to switch to the foundation link I gave you? Are you ready? Or would you like me just to stick with this? Because then we could go through some videos.
All right. Pete, do you want to switch to the foundation link? There we go.
Let's see. So this is my foundation. You can really see, maybe we could just keep to this. This is great. And these are the videos that evolved out of the resemblage process. So, and they're a little bit later. You're talking about 2017, 18. Some of them were made this year. Like if you scroll up a little higher so we can see the hot dog piece. That's a mental marionette with dancing dogs. That was sold for 3 ETH. So also on the blockchain in NFT, I found like a very interesting group of collectors who were very, very forward thinking, and they really believe in my work. And I have an amazing collector base. It's not large, but I have a kind of specialized group. You could keep scrolling a little bit more in the available time. Yep, some of these pieces are from the last show that I had in December. That was my first all NFT show, where I just had the idea of making a bunch of characters and throwing paint at them up against a white wall. Very simple. I had only 2 weeks to make the show. I'm about to mint the work for the new show. I didn't even get into time to explain it, but I would love to another time. Those will also be up on my foundation very soon.
Okay, David, one quick question.
Yes.
Do you make them by yourselves or do other people help you?
Most of the work made like in character for Instagram, I have made myself. For the pieces that you're seeing here were all made by me. The one down there in the middle of Spaghetti Disasters of the Future, by the way, was sold to a museum in Spain, Collection Solo, which is I'm thrilled to be in that collection. So you can see that NFTs are getting into museums now. But yes, I make most of them myself, except for now the shows. Then I bring on a crew. I also use sometimes models. That young woman is being crucified in Coca-Cola on an upside down crucifix. That was a friend of mine. We had a great time doing that.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, David. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, not a problem.
Yeah, so now we're going to switch to Michael Jew.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for that introduction, and nice to be here. I'm Michael Jew. I'm, I guess, a multi-media sculptor. I work in a number of different materials, and I will say that what I'll show you today is a extension and a collaborative project of mine called OG Organic Growth Crystal Reef. And I can say as a sculptor, working in kind of contemporary visual art, that there's a long history of contemporary art dealing with intangibles, from Marcel Duchamp's Air de Paris, glass container of air from Paris, to Solowit's instructional drawings, in which the drawings are generated by the installer. And so to me, the idea of art on a blockchain was irresistible as a sculptor. The concept that artwork would be, or something would be verified, to kind of just talk about the idea of materiality and reality, and this kind of strange, nerdy, physical, philosophical question of material. And so, in 2019, Nadia Taija introduced me to Andy Alakin and Snark.art, a platform, digital art platform, that is working in producing blockchain art. And we began the discussion at that point, pre-COVID, that kind of blossomed and gestated during the following years into this project, Organic Growth Crystal Reef. And I will share here. And so Organic Growth Crystal Reef is a generative NFT project. And by that, I mean that, as most people would know here within our present company, but maybe not our whole audience, it's an NFT that is affected by external forces, including data or other kinds of information that changes the actual NFT itself, as opposed to a static NFT, which is a kind of what you see is what you get. In this case, what we created was a collection of 10,301 unique 3D crystals. I've been working with crystalline forms and the idea of growth and process in my art, a process that often occurs behind the scenes, process that somehow unfolds as an intangible and results in a manifestation. I kind of see the artwork as a result of all of this process. Sometimes the process is more evident, which is the making, the going, the doing, the exploring, and the research, and sometimes chemical and physical processes that make up what results. And in this case, that kind of discussion and interest led to the creation of of a question, which I posed for Andy. What if we could create a project, an NFT project on the blockchain that would have its own life? That would be almost, kind of analogous to virtual plane, and that which happens under, thousands of degrees, under under incredibly extreme conditions in the Earth, generating crystal forms could be kind of analogous to the virtual space in which digital art is created. And so we thought to create a collection of 10,301 seed crystals. When I was first introduced to Andy and posed this question, we got very excited and realized that we needed a third collaborator, and that was Daniil Krivoruchko, who would be a bridge, someone who is very experienced in the NFT world, but also is a brilliant digital artist and motion graphics artist in his own right, and who could translate and understand and speak the same language. He was working on parallel projects and that were dealing with data visualization. And I guess in many ways, both of us do similar things in our own kinds of respective media. Work with information and processes, and they can be chemical, they can be kind of historical, and they result in through this kind of alchemical mix in a visual or physical result. So we made these 10,301 crystal seeds, and they were generated by being minted by 6,955 unique wallets. This project is meant to be a long-term art project with really unique mechanics bridging this gap, which was the real intention. When we started discussing and talking with each other, we thought, well, what would be the reason we would collaborate? And one of the thoughts was that we got very excited about was, can we create a bit of a bridge between more conventional and traditional art worlds and NFT and digital art worlds, which in many ways both I and Daniil felt needed more recognition. This is the team that was kind of assembled, or my co-creators. We're backed by a bit of a larger team, but myself as holding the kind of dubious distinction of coming from a physical art world, to Daniil as a digital artist, and Andy Lakin running the back end and serving as the kind of the platform head of Snark.art, who brought us together. The mechanics basics of how this generative project works is that, as I mentioned, it's built around the idea of a dynamic NFT, which changes with external data. So these OGCR crystals were basically a seed crystal that would be static until minted, but take all of the kind of publicly available metadata or of the buyer user's crypto wallet, as well as the kind of timestamp and blockchain data information, and create this almost genetic kind of code, which would determine, according to crystallography principles, as well as coral reef kind of growth, which I felt was a nice organic bridge between, say, the mineral, the things we think are ahuman, and the kind of organic or biological, which would be the crystal reef, which in a coral reef, which in effect is really the crystallized exoskeletons of coral polyps. And if we think about that, we think about both a thing and a place, because the coral reef builds itself on the architecture of its past. So there was a kind of motif involved, but using principles of growth of both of these, growth and development and formation of both of these kinds of the organic entities, we thought to take all of that data and apply it in such a way that it would generate a unique form. Every time that this it wasn't just that, one of the major accomplishments of the team and, Daniil in particular, that we're so excited about was that it wasn't just creating a bridge between like a VFX pipeline and, the publicly available and the block and the metadata but it was just that it would not only stop at that initial growth, but that it would continue to grow up to 7 times every time it was resold and take on a new form, using 20 plus render farms that would create a bespoke render each time. Some of the details of the mechanics were that the crystals changed shape every time they were sold. As I mentioned, they would keep all the aspects of the previous owners and add a new part for every owner. You know, each part of the crystal was generated by the owner's wallet metadata, and every crystal was visually represented the chain of ownership, you know. So this idea that everyone would be kind of collectively contributing, you know, one of the things that we were also, I was particularly drawn to in this idea of participating in this media, you know, in this arena, as a, you know, coming from where I come from, the traditional art world, which traditionally kind of has eschewed kind of ideas of transaction or, you know, anything to do with, you know, money or the kind of idea of in a way, a kind of denial of the transactional within the art sphere. And so I was really drawn to the idea of us, you know, going directly at the media, you know, or directly at, you know, the idea of the transactional as a media. What if we were to use that, you know, as the kind of media itself? And as such, you know, what if we could use this kind of information to create form, unique form, but in a way at the same time create community and in a collective manner generate work that would be commensurate with the concept of a kind of decentralized, taking away from the center of the object itself and talk about the context and how it was built. So everyone in this that participated in minting and then participated in subsequent sales in a way were helping to kind of define the form itself, creating something unique. And so they're, you know, we consider them in a way co-creators of the collection. You know, there are parameters to that. So I'm not saying that we're all makers, but in some ways we're authors in participants in this gesture. And one of the things I think that really struck me about, as I learned more about NFTs, is that one of the natures of, you know, being involved in blockchain, NFT, and crypto is participation, you know, and I think that's something that is also very unique and is something that attracts people to this community or to this place. Some of the other mechanics we wanted to do that, you know, really was a brainchild of Daniil, but for me was taken very to heart, was the idea that, you know, for me, I'm interested in the idea that artwork, in a sense, is aware of itself. It's not only self-aware in a self-conscious way, but aware that it exists, you know, not just in a vacuum, but in the world. And in many ways, and much of my own work references that through research or material that has kind of veracity, like it has a foothold in something you can not just prove, but that you could touch or have felt or have experienced before, you know, from the reflection of yourself in water and the mirroring form to, you know, heat, to the idea of growth and death and decay. In this case, you know, that kind of high and lofty kind of intro aside, one of the things that we thought we would do is be self-aware of, and Daniil thought was, what if it was self-aware of the other NFTs around it? So not only would the, you know, the blockchain information, the metadata, and the crypto wallet IDs be used, but what if it could sense the crystal growth could be somewhat triggered and altered by the presence of other NFTs? And so there was a kind of collaborative, in some cases, and homage-based kind of genetic mutation put in in which the kind of algorithm or the would detect different holdings of other NFTs in particular in someone's wallet. So if you had a CryptoPunk, it would take a particular crystalline form. If there was a Bored Ape, if there was an Art Blocks, et cetera, et cetera. Another way of kind of acknowledging for me the sphere of where we were at, and also contemporary artists kind of getting involved, was to speak to other contemporary artists and kind of colleagues of mine and that I did not know, who were working in interesting and very different ways in trying to unpack and learn and make forays from their traditional physical art into this NFT realm. And so Daniil's first minted one, a crystal seed, which went to my wallet, and I contributed a form, which then went to Glenn Kino, who generated this form through his wallet, to Nicholas Gallinen, to Sarah Mayo Haas, to Tom Sachs, to Krista Kim. And all of these artists work in very unique ways in their own right, from installation and conceptual artists, Glenn Kino, to a musician and performance, as well as sculptor, Nicholas Gallinen, who does also large outdoor installations, and was utilizing NFTs in his music, and to Sarah Mayo Haas, who started Bitcoin very early on in the whole kind of blockchain and NFT art arena, to Tom Sachs.
Michael, sorry, you've got 2 minutes.
Sure. To Krista Kim, who does very immersive installations and NFTs. The other thing that we wanted to do is make sure that this project was going to evolve and continue to be something in the physical world. And that was the great kind of goal. And not only would this work be generated in the digital plane, but move towards the physical. And so the aspiration and intent, which we're doing now, is building a sculpture of 10,301. That's a kind of portrait, in a way, a single communal artwork of all of this activity and this time of participation. And so as we continue, this is a pre-visualization of one form that reef might take. In a way, we're calling this sculpture the reef. These are some more previs of the form that reef might take. Crystal prints we're experimenting with at the moment. One other of the kinds of various assets we're trying to do, we have been delivering as this develops, is AR-ready models, which were, again, available directly as a link through OpenSea on the platform, something that's also kind of new. To also existing, letting this kind of digital 3D NFT exist in a metaverse-ready kind of arena. So people are already creating galleries and allowed to utilize this in their own kinds of ways, developing them for voxels, for other kinds of metaverse platforms as well. And I'll kind of close with the idea that, with the notion and introduction of the idea of our DAO. And this is another important thing. And our whole community then was able to, as OGCR, create a DAO that is a community of members that own crystals within the collection, who are voting and the commercial holders of the project. So basically, the DAO members will dictate the future of the project through voting and other kinds of participatory activities, with the intent that the most exciting thing, in addition to the crystal coral reef actually going towards an institutional exhibition, and finally, as we examine it, potentially to the ocean itself, in collaboration with a number of scientists in Hilo, University of Hawaii Hilo, is the idea that this DAO would generate an ecosystem, would be the basis for using OGCR as almost a kind of analog for a digital reef, in which the data that we pioneered and innovated would be licensed and given to other artists, and whose projects would be funded by vote based on our royalties, so that we could have an ecosystem of flourishing other creative projects built upon those innovations. And so that this reef would not just stop, but continue to be dynamic in many ways, both in the digital plane as well as in the physical world. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, there was a question from Cynthia D. Donata. Is there any real world connection to the managing coral reefs? And I think you just covered it, right?
Yes, actually. So right now I can reveal that we have just begun, in all transparency, which is, I think, fitting for the blockchain, is that I've just begun taking 3D prints, and we're starting with the University of Hawaii Hilo, as I mentioned, to place these 3D prints in nylon 12 in the ocean to do actual material studies of recruitment of coral polyps and other marine life onto this particular material. And we'll examine other 3D printed materials that we can put in. So with the notion that, okay, these things started in a digital plane with, data, digital, with kind of public metadata, dynamically grew to a point with the idea that they would keep growing. But then again, after 2-3 months, needed to become static as regular NFTs. But the notion that they would continue to go and pick up the baton in the real world and develop was something that is really exciting. So we're dropping these crystal prints into the ocean and studying their growth, and hopefully they'll continue to change and evolve. So the baton will be picked up from the digital into the real organic and biological world, who will continue the work, and we will study that as well. The other offshoot of this that ties into the real world is a little more philanthropic, and that was to collaborate and share data with the Jennifer E. Smith Lab at Scripps Oceanic Institute, and as well as the Benthic collection there. And so we were able to, through royalties and in deference to the energy usage and the obvious kind of some of the energy problems and issues with using Ethereum, which we used at the time, was to kind of, again, try to not only give back, but create a relationship that would be ongoing.
Great. Thank you so much. Next, we welcome Casey Reas.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Good afternoon. Thanks, Michael Reas. Thank you, Michelle, for the invitation. I'm going to go ahead and share screen and get going. So this is a presentation in 4 parts, 4 brief parts. When I was speaking with Michael Reas the other day, he had mentioned an interest, back in the late 1990s in a programming environment that I was helping around with called Design by Numbers that led to a programming environment called processing. We celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. But the real idea of this is using code as a medium for artists and to build educational materials and a culture of artists working with code in the longest tradition of the arts, rather than something that's new, something that is different. Instead, working with code has been around for over 60 years now, and it's been heavily integrated over the decades into the way artists think, the way artists make. And so processing is a programming system, programming environment to allow people to begin to experience working with code in a visual way. Code always needs a medium, whether you're going to be working with numbers or working with poetry or working with sound. Processing is an environment for working with code and visual images. And so I'm very much of a visual artist. Code is my medium. In addition to co-founding processing with Ben Fry, I also produce almost all of my work with this environment as well. And the idea is to get from idea into image through code kind of as quickly as possible. We talk a lot about this idea of sketching with code. And so these are a few examples. So what we really want to do is make these things accessible. I'm in California now, where Silicon Valley holds a lot of power. A lot of companies hold a lot of power over how we work with software, which largely in 2022 means how we live our lives. The idea of processing is that things should always be open, completely, can be downloaded for free. Everybody has access to the software. And we put a lot of time building materials to make that happen. And so we talk about this as free, libre, open source software, just to make sure the idea is free as in freedom, but it's also free to download as well. And then the difference here is that it's for the arts, for the visual arts. I think in the visual arts, there's a lot of large companies like Adobe, which largely really dominate the market, extract a lot of resources from artists. The idea of working with processing is that you can just download it and work with it immediately without any of that extra burden. The difference here is that instead of learning to use software, we're learning to create software. And so for me, this is an idea of of literacy. To be literate in a medium, you need to be able to read and write. And the idea of being able to create softwares that you can imagine and build your own tools sometimes, but then also you can use it to build your own finished works as well. So this is just the homepage for processing.org. It's a resource for materials, for downloading it, for learning. We'll move beyond that to part 2, which is talking about my studio over a little bit of time. I think one of my themes today is that although I've been working a lot with NFTs over the last 3 years, I see it as an extension of everything that I've been doing over the years. This is my map of how I see my work fitting in with the history of the visual arts. For me, these are all different visual technologies or media for making visual work. And I think we have some really interesting things that's happened. We've kind of moved from not moved from, but we have, in addition to the autographic work, we now have the holographic work, starting with photography. We have things that can be reproducible analog, reproducible digital. I really think of my practice really similar to how a painter works in the studio, to how an experimental animator works in the studio. I think I have a lot of the same priorities, a lot of the same history, but the medium that I work with really is software in the sense that it's live work, it's real time, and it's generating. Kind of some of the things that Michael Ju was talking about in terms of things changing over time, things growing rather than sort of appearing, are a large part of the work that I do. So I've been showing work in galleries and institutions. This is from the Bitforms Gallery in New York in 2003. Here at that piece of wood you see in the front, that was an interface that allowed people to perform the software. And then on the back wall were works on paper that were selections of the full space of possibilities of the media that the software can produce. This is another example from the Bitforms Gallery about a decade later. I've done a lot of work on paper over the years with archival pigment prints, and a lot of the work that I make, it just won't run real time. And so I need to work in other media, video, and works on paper in order to realize what I'm trying to do. This is work from around 2005 from the micro image series. And this work, and really the whole reason I started writing code in the first place was my interest in drawing, and combining my interest of drawing with my emerging interest at the time in the late 1990s with artificial life, which separate from artificial intelligence, artificial life is often the systems of growth and the systems of behavior. And so all of these drawings were created by the software running live, me performing it and moving the space, and this is sort of the static moment in that performance. This is a detail just so you can see the surface of the paper a little bit. And so being an artist working in systems, which of course goes back decades and decades, even before computers, that's the lineage that I see. I began to get frustrated that all of my ideas were encoded into computer languages. I didn't feel they were accessible. And so following the work of a lot of conceptual artists and artists like Sol LeWitt, I began writing out my systems in a way that were more legible. And so I switched to using English language first, before things move into code. This is an example of one of the works. And this is an example of how this work ties into these histories of objective art, hard edge abstraction, non-objective art, hard edge abstraction, constructivism, but applying these behaviors to different essential forms. And this is what an example of that system will produce. And here's how that's moved into space, into an installation. Here's a photo where you can see the space and color a little bit better. So this is an image from the Whitney Museum of American Art. I think it was 2018. On the back wall, you see the Sol LeWitt. In the foreground, you see one of my older works sort of represented in the space from another view. So this is the lineage and the tradition that I think about the work and that I place the work within. And moving forward, I started working a lot with collage as a medium. This is working with television signals. This is a really stroboscopic, subwoofer, like very physical experience. These are works at the Charlie James Gallery here in Los Angeles, working with photography and thinking about these ideas of how the image is captured through the lens and then sort of like projecting it into space as an inverse of that. working at, as always, kind of these edges of the representational and abstraction. This is a show from Bitforms Gallery, New York from around 2016, moving back away from collage, more into ideas of simulation, ideas of the nature of the digital material and like pulling apart images according to their pixel data and then representing those in space. I really think of it as an extension of analytical cubism, but with real-time live software systems. And then whenever I have a chance, I work with traditional media. My origin is with drawing. So these are some woodblock prints drawing on the table at Anderson Ranch Art Center in Colorado. Here's sort of a detail of how the paper surface kind of feels with that piece. I spent a lot of time the last few years working with machine learning, which for me was a bit of a right turn after working with code and generative systems in that constructive way for a long time. But it was a really refreshing moment to think more about histories of photography and cinema in my work. And I produced a set of video works with sound over the last few years. Okay, so moving directly into the NFT space, I started working on FeroFile, co-founded it with a company called Bitmark in 2019. And we released our first exhibition in early 2021. So I think this idea of NFTs and art, I think it's something that's been brewing for a long time. There's been many developments that have happened that have led to this significant moment from the last few years. I think we have this long history of dematerialization of the art object, working with digital mass media, early with like hypercard decks and distributing work on CD-ROM. And then with the wide access of the internet, we can now publish our work online so anybody can access it at any moment. I think these are all precursors to this, what we've seen the last couple of years. For my own work, with generative work, we need to have capable machines that can really run the work, which now we have. And then I think the significant development of blockchains is records of certificates of authenticity. So for me, what's exciting about this work is that it's online, completely available at all moments. People don't have to travel, go to the gallery where the work maybe is only available for a few weeks. The work becomes more accessible, and it's a shift in priorities for me. I think artists within digital media, it's been vibrant, it's been a scene, it's been a culture for decades, but there's been very few opportunities and ways for people to collect the work, and I think that's really changed recently. And whether it's, I think the reality is there's a confidence that the blockchain record, and there's a social consensus around that allows people to consider collecting the work when they weren't considering that before. I think other things that are really interesting are this long battle of artists and artist unions pushing for secondary sales all the way back into the 50s and 60s. Fighting for that is now a reality with NFTs. And my own view of NFTs is they can be a certificate of authenticity. And so I think the work is not restricted to being a short video or an image or something that lives online. I think any kind of work can have an NFT as a certificate of authenticity. And so with FeroFile, this was our very first show in March of 2021, the Social Code Show, which was an exhibition of all software work. And then one thing that for me is essential to FeroFile is it's really about creating opportunities for artists. It's about having these group shows, I'm gonna go back a slide, where artists together make editions of their work, they trade those with each other. So it's a non-commercial activity. So for example, Andrew received a copy of Leah's work and received a copy of Raven's work here. And then extra editions are made that become available for collectors. So I think it's this idea of a group show, working with the curator, forming a community for a short time, making editions and then trading works and then making more available. So the artist rights are encoded within this, I think are really important. And they encode a lot of values from the sort of history of artists working and make it more clear within the NFT environment. So copyright and image right remains with the artists, percentage of secondary sales, that the work always needs to be credited. And so this is a legal contract that comes along with the NFT when it's collected and that people sort of sign on to when they collect the work. That collectors can't modify, distort, or misrepresent the work when they display it, that the provenance is public, you know where the work has been, where it's going. I think it's something really interesting about Michael Ju's work that was just presented, and that you also grant certain rights to the collector to display the work, and that you retain the rights in perpetuity. So a few more shows on Ferrophile. This one by Dominica Quaranta. I think it's exciting because it mixes, artists like Petra Kortright showing video, Francois Gamma, who's working with GIFs as a medium, Camilla Card, who's working with 3D models, that all of these forms of digital work can be shown together in a thematic way with a curatorial statement, and the work is sequenced in a way set by the curator. The most recent show that's just wrapped up is the On-Screen Presence show, which was created by Regina Harsani. This was a show of online performances where the artists all broadcasted live from their studio, and some of them were participatory. So for example, for John F. Simon's Every Icon show, the people who had collected the access path for the work worked with John in the studio to produce the Every Icon black and white pixel image that then was produced live as a woodblock print. For Molly Soda's work, she had dozens of people that were working with her in a web browser with a tool that she had made in order to edit her video live that became the NFT, became minted at the end. And then the show coming up next week is Wetware, which is a cyberfeminism index benefit show for the publication. And this show also supports a lot of the artists that were pioneers in the cyberfeminist movement in the 1990s web. So with Ferrophile, I'm really excited about, bringing new audiences to this really vital work that really founded the field, as well as working with, younger artists and exposing them and crossing these different cultures together. So to end, just briefly talking about my studio in the last year, we looked at a lot of prior installation images. So within my world of generative art, we've been talking with each other. We've been an online community for decades now. We've been sharing our work online. And I always lived in these two spaces. I lived in a space of working in the studio for a year or two, having a show that's up for 6 weeks, the show goes down, the work gets shown. But at the same time, I've been in these online spaces in communication with other software artists. And what's happened now is that really for the very first time, a market has begun to emerge for that work. And what I really hope is that artists can make their own decisions if they want to engage with that market or they don't want to engage with that market. But what I think is interesting is that now there is that opportunity. And so over the last year, I've had 7,000 different software artworks collected through 7 different releases of 1,000. Every single one of those work is a one of one. It's all generative software. It's all running live. It's all running real time. That the work is all available for people to access anytime. I think a significant thing about NFTs is everybody has access to the work, but the collector has other rights towards that work. And for me, it's been a bit of it's been a shift in priorities. So when I show work in a gallery, I'm very specific about the lighting, the sound, the specific projector used, everything about the experience. I think with the NFT work, I prioritize more that the work is more readily and easily accessible. And I think like the history of cinema and recorded music, that generative art now it has become a mass media. And I think that's been a really interesting shift. So these are some places to look at. These are places that I've engaged with generative art through different blockchains, different places to show. And then, yeah, that's the end. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Casey. Wow, what an amazing array of interesting stuff going on today. Casey, let me start with you for just a second. I'm curious, I have 2 questions. The first is, I missed the detail about how the works get bound to the contracts. Is that could you explain that more clearly?
The works get bound to the contracts.
In other words, you've got Ferrophile is a platform, and when somebody offers it for sale, do they actually sign a document that says that's the case, or?
It's more of, the internet style of by I acknowledge that by collecting this work, I'm adhering to these terms. And on the page where the transaction happens, everything is spelled out there. And what we have spelled out there is really the human readable shorthand with links to the legal documents. And the contract is based on the Siegel Lab and Brzezinski 1971 document, which was a really pioneering set of rights for artists, but it's been updated for digital media at this time.
Okay.
And
Now,
then when the work is collected, the collector has a package to download, which is a little bit different approach to NFTs. And in that package is the actual contract in PDF form that they have access to.
okay, really interesting. I'm also kind of curious, is Feral File just the partnership between, I'm sorry, I forgot your partner's name?
Oh, well, it's Sean Moss Poltz is the CEO of Bitmark, which is the other co-founder. Sort of, we have the corporate entity and myself as the co-founders for the project, but they bring all the experience of digital rights and blockchain. Like they built their own blockchain that predates Ethereum, and I'm bringing the knowledge of artist priorities and curatorial priorities to the project.
I see. Is there any other part of that that's maybe a DAO? Have you explored having a DAO? Now, a DAO, of course, is a decentralized autonomous organization.
We've talked about it a lot, but we haven't really found a plan for how that works for us yet.
Yeah, that's good. I'm just interested. And we're going to get to Michael Jew's DAO in just a couple of minutes, but I also had another sort of observation / question. You know, Richard Serra once wrote that you're only as great as the obscurity of your sources. And it seems to me that one of the things that the internet and internet art has done is it sort of explode that. And so the opposite is now true, that you're only as great as the openness of your project and the kind of connectivity that is within that project. Yeah. And I think that what I find so fascinating about your work, both with, you know, you have your own body of work, these generative pieces that are extraordinary, but you also have this processing, and you've done a lot of work around that, published books, done workshops, and so on, and this Feral File thing. Those two events being so much about that connectivity, the opposite of obscurity, rather the uncovering and the making available. Do you, can you talk a little bit more about that? Can you put a sort of a frame around the creative aspect of I almost think of, sorry, I'm going on, sorry about that. But I think of Joseph Kosuth when he said, the ready-made will be made ready, right? And in some strange way, that's kind of what you've done. You've made the ready-made ready for other people to use and to implement. And that's a creative act, you know?
Yeah. I think it's about reducing the obstacles for working with software and working with code as a medium. And the result of that sometimes is a lot of bad, naive art gets made. I mean, the same way that with painting, that anybody can sort of get started with painting. You have tremendous volume of naive bad painting, and then you have people who really have the craft and concept. And I think the problem with technology and art was always that it required resources that were unattainable, and it had a culture of exclusion. And so we've been trying to break down that culture of exclusion and to try and reduce the barrier for people to engage with it. And so I think the largest mission of processing has been working its way into both the education system, but also like the nonprofit artist-run space workshops over the many years. And I think software is becoming more and more culturally approachable and technically approachable for artists over the generations.
Yeah, I thought one thing that was kind of interesting is that the one image that you showed, and I can't remember the exact context of what you were saying, but it almost looks like a hairy chest, right? I mean, I hate to give it sorry, that's terrible of me to have done, but it has an element of being extremely abstract and at the same time being somehow physical and almost a little queasy, a little uncanny. Mm-hmm. Do you kind of agree with that, that sometimes your work has this uncanny edge to it?
Yeah, that was my aesthetic aim for, I don't know, that 15 years that I worked in that way. You know, kind of like Darcy Wentworth Thompson on growth and form. It was like, I meant it to be abstractions of how the natural world works, not how it looks, but how it works. And as a result, things enter that pareidolia space of people find different associations, but I was always really trying to work at an edge of representation and abstraction in the organic space. So that was my intent.
That's very interesting. So, you know, let's shift for a moment to David Henry Brown. David, so, I mean, there's nothing hidden in your sort of engagement of the abject and the uncanny. And, you know, you clearly, sometimes you have the mask, you know, the picture of the model over the face with the eye cut out, and there's a human eye back there, very disturbing in a way. And I'm kind of curious, you know, how do you, I mean, obviously it's a kind of visual strategy because, you know, getting eyeballs on the internet and how to do that and all that sort of thing. But it also seems like a real commitment on your part to something, to a discontent, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I would say I don't really understand what reality is or what existence is. So my work is always kind of like trying to figure out, I make art to try and figure out what the hell is going on. It's quite personal. It's not a practice, it's my life. So, you know, again, for me to connect and communicate like the amount of disconnection that there is in America, I sort of like, I like to wear these images or turn myself into illusions so that I can, like, even if I don't really believe in what I'm wearing, actually, I think Duchamp said, be indifferent to your own taste, right? So yes, I mean, so when I wear that magazine advertisement, it's not because I believe in it. It's actually because I don't believe in it. And then I sort of present that to the public. But I think on another level too, I just want to say that my relationship with NFT is not so code oriented like these other amazing artists, and I've really enjoyed the presentations. You guys learned a lot, but I'm interested in how the technology is influencing reality more so. But I hope to move more into generative processes, and people are asking me all the time if I'm going to use it. But instead, I don't know. It's very organic with me. It's like my work kind of has been arcing very elegantly, like into the technology, to the point now where these, especially the videos, I mean, the still images I was able to sell as prints and show as prints, but the videos are really kind of, for me, the digital canvases of the future, a totally ephemeral act that's like, it's like a liquid living painting, you know, and it's everything you could hope for as a performance-oriented artist. It's just totally amazing.
You know, I think it's really interesting that you said you don't know what reality is, and
No,
I think that I think that is a common experience in 2022, whereas maybe in 1990 people wouldn't say, "Well, I know what real is," you know. So I mean, even George Bush once said, "Walks like a duck, talks, you know, quacks like a duck, must be a duck." So I'm kind of curious though, because on the other hand, you know, you're actually creating a character, David Henry Nobody Jr. You didn't call it David Henry Brown. So, and on the one hand, you say in your own life, this isn't a practice, this is your life.
Yeah.
And yet on the other side, there's a fiction. It's a fiction of the David Henry Nobody Jr., et cetera. And that has a long history for you. How do you reconcile these sort of twisted or, you know, convoluted kinds of issues around what is real, or what you're doing is real?
Well, I think by the time I take the video and publish it, or the recording, and of course the recording of something is more important than the real thing. It's been that way for a while. But I think that those represent some kind of like a psychic breakthrough moment where I become something else. I mean, I don't think we really know what we are, actually. So, and I think that the internet, the representation of the self and the body and the systems and the Declaration of Interdependence, which both the other artists are getting into. That was a term that I made up that I would love to work with a bunch of people to create the Declaration of Interdependence. But I think all these systems are, you're dealing with an extreme, I use all the technologies as a way to enhance a discussion about introspection and questioning like what everything is. I mean, I look to animators who have had the freedom to really reinterpret the human body. And I'm like, how would I do that in a performance physically? And coming from an engineering background from my father's side, I love like trying to take, you know, Picasso said, if you can imagine it, you can make it real, but like, how do I actually apply that and make it really work in a convincing way? It's immensely challenging. The solo show I'm about to open was an immense challenge. I love it, and I want it even harder next time.
Yeah, very good. Michael, I kind of wanted to get to you a little bit. You know, your project is so expansive, and maybe that's in part, I mean, it's so brilliant and so expansive, and maybe that's in part, you know, being able to collaborate with multiple voices, you know, and having that kind of thing. But I'm also extremely interested in the DAO that you mentioned. And I'm not sure that everybody on the call might understand what a DAO is, how it works, decentralized autonomous organization. And also, how did you guys set that up in your process, and why did you set up a DAO? So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, can you hear me, Michael?
Yes, thanks.
The establishment and creation of the DAO was one of the really early and important, you know, developments and outcomes for our project. It's in fact very central, that concept that we would kind of take commercial rights and some kind of idea of the author and ego a little bit out of the center, you know, much like an interest in moving away from the centralized object to all of the forces that influence it. And, you know, we want to call it context, you want to call it process, whatever it might be, and realize that kind of connectivity and collectivity might be what defines the work itself and the project itself. And so in this case, taking the commercial ownership out of it was one way to do that, and spreading it around into the idea of the DAO, because that idea of the singular ownership and possession of the object didn't seem to be appropriate, you know, for this thing. There is ownership, of course, of your individual crystal. But one thing that's brilliant, I think, about the NFT space is that all of that work as a visual item is shared, right? It's accessible to everybody. You look at it on the platforms, you can distribute it, you can do what you'd like with it. Ownership, of course, is, you know, was elegantly put, you know, by Casey and such, is something that is a unique feature and very interesting as well. But the idea that there would be a surrogate overall development as this project had, you know, kind of made its inexorable course from digital, or from concept to digital, and out into AR, out into a metaverse, and finally into I guess what we're going to call the real world, whatever that is, David, is something that was important, you know, so that perhaps that the reef itself could become this kind of symbolic collective thing. And as such, in this space, it seems appropriate that it wouldn't be owned by one person, and its fate wouldn't be determined again, even by its co-creators. It's launched and it continues to develop. And I hope in a parallel way that DAO, where each owner has voting power according to what they have, one-to-one, within this community, is self-checked. You know, one of the things early on that was a fear is if we're in a kind of litigious and, you know, transactional mindset where, you know, artists, everything's commercialized and it's about ownership, then the mindset is that, okay, we should be afraid that someone's going to form a block and decide to weaponize or steer this in a weird way. But one thing that's interesting in this community is that the dialogue and discourse and belief around the project is what self-checks what happens. Relinquishing control as, you know, an artist is pretty tough sometimes. But the idea with this project that could be part of its concept and allow it to kind of be self-reflexive and then manifest was actually kind of exciting in a way, as much as it's scary.
Can
So
you tell
letting
that
that
story
go,
that you told me yesterday about two decisions that the DAO made that kind of surprised you, or maybe, you know, you had opinions about?
yeah, I mean, one of the decisions that the DAO made that was, I thought that was really interesting was to, you know, first of all, to extend the growth. And early on, we had before the DAO, because DAOs were so scrutinized as a kind of securities issue, we were not calling it a DAO because, you know, if individuals were getting kind of financial compensation for this, it would be a securities issue, right? So we were referring to our DAO as a community fund. While this was kind of a hot topic over the winter. And so, and it still continues and perhaps will be until, you know, finally some, you know, the federal government gets its, you know, hands into regulating something and participating. But in a way, our community fund was able to, the first vote was to extend the growth period. You know, our concept was this is a 2-month growth period because it's very expensive to run 20 render farms, right? And make bespoke things. And also because in concept, we wanted there to be an arc and a period that this represented. What's interesting to me is that the community fund first voted to extend it for 1 month. So they basically right away took the project concept out of our hands. And it was undeniable that we would let that happen. We did then in a self-checking method, which I thought was, again, you know, kind of reassuring, was the community agreed with us that we should pull back and it shouldn't just go into this 2-month period, but we would settle on December 31st. So it stopped then. Another thing that was, again, once we'd become a DAO, that was interesting to me was that the DAO voted to not to reopen growth because in a way we had the metadata for the project and you know, we could lock it at any time, but if we don't lock it or unlock it, then this project is subject to, you know, opening itself up again and regrowing the crystals and ostensibly, you know, reinvigorating a market for it and adding more value to these things, which is, you know, usually what NFT holders, as we kind of stereotypically have come to believe or come to learn, are supposed to be strictly in it for the monetary and the transactional, you know, and the kind of financial gain of it, like a market. And in this case, our community voted to no, that was not part of the original concept. You know, a big surprise in a way. Don't add value to it. That will take away from it. Let's look at the long run of this as an artwork. And so that was really kind of interesting. You know, that's 6,900 some owners in voting in this direction. And I thought that was actually also, you know, quite interesting. And so, surprising, and that surprise is what is really makes it kind of living in a way to me.
Yeah. So I just so that I make sure that I understand. So that the DAO could also, and I think you mentioned this in your presentation, the DAO could also support other artist projects. You know, and those could be, you know, something could be. I don't know, how do you make decisions about that? Do people apply to you and say, I would love to do a project with of a certain kind, and you evaluate its connection to OG Crystal Reef, or how does that work? How do you imagine your DAO supporting other projects?
Well, I think there will be numerous ways and pipelines for that kind of in the works. So I have to talk to our community and my co-creators as well.
Yeah.
But I also think, you know, initially the DAO members can put forth and, you know, they do their research across the board and see what artists and creators are doing and can say, well, maybe we should collaborate with them. And also people are reached and they, you know, this is a community. And so every one of these people have their own connections. Every one of these members have their own kinds of connections, footholds, and research. I think, you know, a lot of people in this space do research and look across at other projects. And so some of those are introduced by in a kind of forum-like manner and then put forth as potential, you know, projects. But I think this is going to all expand and develop as it's growing and it's developing now. And right now, one of the transitions we're making is the OG crystals and OGCR into OG platform. And I think I can kind of mention that now, is that this platform, it will be that reef that you mentioned, that kind of base.
Well, I think, that's pretty fascinating that I think these things, I don't know that they represent definitional changes, but I think they represent sort of shifts where something that was classically taken care of by, say, the National Endowment for the Arts or by the MacArthur Grant or by any number of other sort of institutions and organizations has now transferred to, organizations, and they're nimble organizations that can say, we really want to move on this thing. We don't have to wait for the MacArthur Grant to change its definition of what they want to do. Their whole legal, I know I'm not making much sense, but what I'm saying is the categories are shifting. Like you as an artist that did a creative act with a project that has a whole trajectory has now also come into a realm where you're sort of a little bit of a collector, you're a little bit of a museum, you're a little bit of an agency that supports other artists. I find that really interesting. Casey, for example, you've offered editions of your own work in the context of Feral File, in the context of shows and curated shows and done things like that. But have you also become a collector of the works in Feral File?
Yeah, I think one thing I should say is that I will never release a work through Feral File as the gallerist. So that's just something that I've decided early on. But that's one thing for me. It's been a frustration for a long time. Is I want to support other artists. I want to collect their work. In a gallery, traditional art gallery setting in New York or Los Angeles, I can't, as an artist, I can't afford to support that work. But I think in the NFT space, there's a much wider range of things, and artists are making new income, and they're using that new income to collect other artists. So I've collected hundreds of things over the last year.
Wow,
It's
that's amazing.
been wonderful.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of unusual. Most artists, some artists have collections, usually wealthier artists, and a lot of artists can't afford to collect it. They can't afford to take care of it, and yet at the same time, they love certain, they celebrate art by so many other people, but they can't have it, and this makes a new possibility also for artists and for the kind of community that you live in. It doesn't have to always be a historical community. Like, I love somebody from the past and they really influenced my work. Now, all of a sudden, the influences are live.
And like every blockchain, every space that's created has a different kind of ethos and different kind of community. I think the one that I've been most engaged with is no longer around, but it was called Hicketnum, and it was on the Tezos blockchain. And unlike Ethereum, where there are sometimes fees of hundreds of dollars to release a work, works were available all the way from the equivalent of a few dollars to a few $1,000s, and it really allowed artists to support and collect each other at a global scale, rather than just in the New York art scene kind of scene.
Yeah, right. Well, there's a question from Cynthia D. Donata to Henry David Brown. How do you think tech has influenced reality? And then I would put an addendum to that, and I would say, how do you think your relationship to tech has influenced your own work?
Well, regarding tech, it's all about algorithms and machine learning, right? One of the things that why my character is so strange is that I find the internet to be quite strange. There's never been a medium that looks into you more than you look into it. Never, except for maybe reality itself, or nature. But like film and TV don't observe you. You're highly observed. And that is, to some extent, that's the not being a software person at all, but those are the attributes of the internet. But it's also been harvested and exploited by corporations. I have younger friends who talk about like being on TikTok, for example, where it's the genius of TikTok is the ability to they get your numbers so fast about what you like, and they start to send you, they figure out what your category is very quickly, that algorithm. For young people that I know, like in their 20s and stuff, it's like unreal. It is so fast. They get your number, and then riding on that is kind of like is ultimately advertisement, right? I mean, the art is kind of used to gentrify for advertisement on the web. Let's see if that's the case in Web3, probably. But there's no doubt that, you know, whether you're an artist or not, we're all processing the technology. It's still pretty new, you know, and it's very democratized and easily accessible to everybody that can at least have a phone, and not everybody in the world can, I know, but in my immediate world, everybody does. So I don't know, it's kind of like the universal, the tech and the internet is the sort of, is the kaleidoscope through which we see reality right now collectively. It's a collective live and dynamic painting, basically. All this stuff is sculpted by large tech companies. I think there is some promise in NFT through decentralization by spreading out the ownership of that and giving an individual the ability to own something, right? So ephemeral that they create. I don't know, maybe the other guys can expand upon that a little bit more. But yeah, no, I think about tech a lot, and I also enjoy the works of other artists. Like Beeple is quite critical of Zuckerberg and Facebook in his work, and I think, you know, we need more of that. Let's hold them accountable.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask each of you. We're coming to the end right now. We might go over just a minute or two, but I'd like to ask each of you. What is the best thing and what is the worst thing about the way this will change us? Now, you know, if you don't have a worst thing, we don't have to get grim, you know, if you don't have a worst thing. So what is the best thing and what is the worst thing about that you see about this technology changing us? So I don't know. Would you like to start, David, or?
You're referring to NFT?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like I just said, the best thing is that it offers decentralization and also the idea that one of the guys brought up between a creative act being like accessible to everybody, but at the same time capable of owned by, you know, somebody sort of owns the digital signature or whatever you want to call it. And then simultaneously, everybody can kind of see it. Like the work is never taken out of the public realm. Like sometimes wealthy collectors will buy like a major painting and put it in a crate and it's never seen again.
Right.
I think that's the best. I think, again, the worst is that as larger corporations step into the space, I don't know what kind of battle there's going to be between and also governments too, the centralized authorities trying to control the narrative and the public, you know, vying for a decentralized, more spread out parlay of power and person to peer-to-peer energy dynamic and exchange of creativity. I think that's remains to be seen. I don't know where it's going to go.
Thank you. So Casey, what do you think?
It's hard. For me, I think at the moment today, at this time, the answer is the best thing and the worst thing is both the money, how the cryptocurrency gets, you know, converted into like exchange rates. I think I come from a time where people were sharing with each other, they were posting work online, just without any thought of capitalism entering into that. The bad thing about that time, the awful thing about that time was that artists working with code, with software, digital art, had no way to support their studio. So they, you know, were able to work at night while simultaneously, you know, finding a way to support themselves. So the good thing about people being able to collect the work is now artists can really focus on their work and build their practice. But at the same time, the fact that everything is expected to have commerce around it, as a really reluctant capitalist, it's really disturbing for me.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Michael, what's your take on this?
I would probably say, to be concise, the best thing might be a kind of reevaluation of our kind of notions of value. And that can spread across the board from what Casey's just mentioned to, as we see these kinds of ideas of, what might be termed transparency, what might be termed collectivity, increases in the necessity of collaboration, ideas of research, and concepts of decentralization, that maybe our notion of value can be one of the things we retool, that the kind of cryptocurrency, not that it's just an alternative, but can help, in a sense, unhinge and destabilize, as cryptocurrencies often are, kind of unstable, create enough space that we start to think about what is the value in participation. And in some ways, maybe the worst thing is the kind of illusion of decentralization, that everyone will go on, that it just becomes a term and does not fulfill some of the promise of Web3.
Great. Well, I just want to say I'm really grateful to all three of you. This was an incredible conversation from my point of view. I learned so much from listening to you talk, and I'm so impressed with the sophistication of each of you as you've approached these complicated, these, I don't even know what to call them, this complicated morass that we find ourselves on the precipice of. And I think all of you have contributed very positively to this development. So I want to thank you. And I also want to thank the people that have supported us in technology, Greg Madison and Peter Navarro. And also I want to thank my colleague, Michelle Thurs. And don't forget, everybody, please keep in mind that tomorrow at 2 p.m., Michelle will host the platforms part of our conference. And we'll have the guests, Sophia Garcia from ArtX Code, the McCoys, who are artists and also the founders of Monograph. And then finally, Nadia Taja from Snark Art. So again, gentlemen, you're the best. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.
That was
It's been
great.
great.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.